Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Why, under this government, has the number of rape convictions and prosecutions fallen to a record low? Mr. Speaker, we all agree that the figures are appalling. The question is why? The government's own review makes clear that rape convictions and prosecutions have halved since 2016. Halved. We know that's nothing to do with the pandemic because this is a 5-year trend. We know it isn't because there are fewer rape cases being reported, because that number's gone up significantly. So let me return to the question that the Prime Minister hasn't answered. Why does the Prime Minister think that rape prosecutions and convictions have plummeted on his watch? Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister knows very well why we voted against his bill, precisely because it did more to protect statues than women. But since he's brought it up, Mr. Speaker, let's address the central question. Prime Minister, 98.4% of reported rapes don't end up in a charge. 98.4%. And therefore the question of sentence never arises in those cases. So since he's brought up the bill, it's his main defence, it seems. Can he tell me, point to what provision in the bill, what clause, what chapter, what part of that bill will do anything to change the fact that 98.4% of reported rape cases don't end in charges and don't get to sentence? Which clause, part, chapter or words in that bill? Point to one thing. What an appalling answer. I asked him why 98.4% of cases aren't getting into the system, and he talks about a sentence. That is the problem. If the Prime Minister thinks that's the answer, that is why we've got these terrible rates of conviction and of prosecution. The answer is there's nothing in that bill. The truth is, victims of rape are being failed. Now, Mr. Speaker, they're not just my words, they're in the government's own report. Victims of rape are being failed. There's no escaping that appalling figure, Prime Minister. 98.4% of rape cases ending without anybody being charged. And those that do get in the system take years to go through. Does the Prime Minister accept that cuts to the criminal justice system have contributed to that appalling situation? Mr. Speaker, I spent 5 years as Director of Public Prosecution prosecuting thousands of rape cases. I don't need lectures, but I do know the impact of cuts in our criminal justice service. The government can't make cuts, significant cuts to the Crown Prosecution Service, 25% cuts to the Ministry of Justice, close half the courts in England and Wales, yes, half the courts, and now pretend that a small budget increase will solve the problem. But, Mr. Speaker, this is more than just about cuts. The rate review is welcome, but it's weak. The Victims Commissioner, the government's Victims Commissioner, described the review as underwhelming. Oh, it could have been 10 times stronger. That review is littered with pilots and consultations on proposals that have literally been discussed for years and years. It is so unambitious. Mr. Speaker, isn't it the case that despite these shameful figures, and they are shameful, the government still isn't showing the urgency needed to tackle the epidemic of violence against women and girls?
I want both sides. It's a very, very emotive and important issue. I need to hear the question and the answers. I certainly don't expect shouting from the backbenches. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, on the Prime Minister's watch, rape prosecution convictions are at a record low. Court backlogs are at a record high. Victims are waiting longer for justice, and criminals are getting away with it. This wasn't inevitable. It's the cost of a decade of Conservative cuts. And even now, the government isn't showing the urgency and the ambition that's needed. Mr. Speaker, the Justice Secretary has done the rarest of things for this government and apologised. But I note the Prime Minister hasn't done that today. It's time he did, that he took some responsibility and backed it up with action. Will he do so?